Today's presenters are Zaya Hussaini, Product Manager, Custom Solutions, and Wayne Froggatt, Senior Business Analyst. They will focus in on using our proximity and contact tracing report. I will hand the floor over to Zaya to start today's presentation. So over to you, Zaya.
Cool, thank you, Elise. Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. I hope you're enjoying your day. As part of the Security in Focus series, today we'll discuss the proximity and contact tracing report and how this feature can support our customers with contact tracing during the COVID-19 pandemic. So in terms of the webinar format, in the first part of the presentation, I will provide a brief overview of the product. Wayne then will provide a live demo of the feature, and at the end of the demo, we will cover a few frequently asked questions and any other questions that you might have during the presentation. To begin with, I would like to start the presentation with the following video, which explains the feature at a high level. So that's a quick overview of the feature. So here at Gallagher, one of our core values is people safety. And in the face of the current global health crisis, the proximity and contact tracing report was designed and developed with the safety of people in mind. As the COVID-19 situation improves and businesses return to operation at some capacity, businesses will need to follow a strict safety guidelines, including contact tracing, to ensure operation safety and business continuity. So how does this feature work? This feature uses event history to identify cardholders who was seen in the same area as another cardholder who was tested positive for an infectious virus, such as COVID-19. For example, if an infected cardholder entered a site, those cardholders who were in the same area as the infected cardholder might now have an elevated risk of infection due to physical contact, surface contact, or just being in a close proximity to the infected cardholder. Therefore, identifying these cardholders at risk of exposure is very important. As shown in the video, you can use this feature to identify those cardholders who might be at risk of infection. Once the cardholders have been identified, you can then proactively communicate with those cardholders and notify them of the exposure so that they can take the right steps for their well-being. The report also identifies those cardholders who did not come in contact with the infected cardholder. For each cardholder identified who is at risk of exposure, the report provides other information such as who the cardholder was infected by, the generation or degree of contact, and for how long the cardholder was exposed to the infected cardholder, and more. Wayne will discuss these and other features of the report in his demo later on. So when we were deciding on the approach of how we would deliver this feature, one of the things that were really important to us was making this feature available to as many of our customers as we could at the quickest time possible. That's why we decided to develop this feature as a REST API utility. And by selecting this approach, we made sure that the feature is compatible across multiple Command Center versions, starting from Command Center 790. The application connects to Command Center via REST API, and it uses the REST cardholder and REST events functions. While the feature is not explicitly licensed, it does require the REST cardholder and REST events licenses for you to be able to use it. For customers who currently do not have these licenses, Gallagher can add these strings to the site's license at no extra cost, obviously. Gallagher has made the software available free of charge to all existing customers. So with that in mind, how can our customers access this feature? Any customers who would like to use this feature can place a $0 order using the C12846 part number, and our team will update their license and provide a link to download the software. Great. So that's an overview of the product, and that concludes the first part of the presentation. Now Wayne will provide a live demo of the feature. If you have any questions regarding this part of the presentation, please leave them in the Q&A section and we'll address them after Wayne's live demo. Over to you, Wayne.
Thanks, Zaya. I hope everyone can hear me. So let's start quickly by looking at Command Center configuration client setup. So here you can see I've enabled the REST API on the Web Services tab of my server properties. I've also created a REST client and a REST client operator with the privileges view cardholders, view events, personal data definitions, and view site. View cardholders is needed to see the cardholders, obviously. Events because the report uses events to calculate the time that you're in contact. We can also add PDFs to the output, and view site is needed to see the access zones. So I've selected to not require PIN certificates. So you can see there is no client certificate thumbprint. If you require a client certificate for connection, then you'll need to create a thumbprint. Right, so I had the executable here on my desktop, so I'll simply launch that now. The default server IP is the local host, port number 8904. The API key is copied from the REST client. And remember credentials for next time. Obviously, that's pretty handy. And we click the authenticate button to launch. So when I click that, the utility is connecting to the Command Center server and the report window is launched. So we have from and to dates. By default, the from date is set to the start of the date that you run it, so the start of today. The report end date is optional. So by default there, as you can see in the tooltip, it will use events right up to the current time. So in my example, I'm going to set these to a date back when I was in the office, January 17th. I'm going to select 8 AM. I'm going to set a end date also that same day. And we'll go for 4 PM in the afternoon. So I add cardholders, simply click the button there. Now I can search for Harry. Select Harry Childs. I can also search by PDF. So I could say mobile. I know Leah's mobile number. Search for that, and it returns the cardholder based on the PDF string. So I'll just leave Harry there for now. By default, the access zones are all selected. I could say I could search for an access zone and deselect that, say. I could obviously simply deselect other zones, etc. Personal data fields. When I export, I'll do this later, but when I export the data, I can also select to include PDFs. So in this case, I'll select email and mobile. And down the bottom here, we can export either all cardholders. So I could turn that on and export all cardholders regardless of contact, or I could choose to export only cardholders within the contact generation limit. We'll talk a bit about that now. So up here we've got max and zone time. The report works best when the zone has exit readers. If it doesn't, then the max and zone time can be used to limit the time the cardholders are assumed to be in the zone. Works similarly, the evacuation report in command set has a similar filter. I am going to use a short max in zone time. So I'll run that down, right down to 5 minutes. Surface risk time. I think of surface risk time as being the time the zone remains hot or infected, if you like, after a cardholder leaves. If it is set to 0, then cardholders must be in the zone together to be reported as a contact. If I was to set that to 1 hour, if they're in the same zone together or if it is set to 1 hour, then if they're in the same zone together or up to 1 hour apart, then they're recorded as if they were in contact. And surface risk time can be set anywhere between 0 minutes and 5 days. Okay, max contact generation. By default, you see it defaults to 2. You can set it anywhere up to 10. So we call the cardholder in the report, the cardholder we select, we call that a Gen 0, or I like to call it a Gen O for origin. We call cardholders who make contact with Harry Generation 1 contacts. Those who contact the Generation 1 become a Generation 2, and so on. And like I said, you can set the report to limit the contact generations returned. In this example, I'm setting it to 3. And we allow up to 10, more than we ever expect will realistically be needed. So I've got my zones set. I'm looking at a Harry. We're going to return a couple of emails on the output later. And I select run. So what's the data return? It returns Harry first of all. It returns the Gen O at the top. It returns Lee Anderson because Lee has been in the Perth room with Harry for 14 minutes and is therefore a Generation 1. Peter also has been in the zone with Harry for 12 minutes in this case and it was also a Generation 1. John Smythe, however, John hasn't contacted Harry but has been in contact with Peter, who was a contact of Harry, so he's returned as a Generation 2. Duration. The duration minutes is cumulative across the same generation cardholders. So if I spend 5 minutes with Harry and then say 7 minutes separately with another Gen 0, then I'll get reported as 12 minutes. If I spend 10 minutes simultaneously with 2 Gen 0s, I'll only get reported as 10 minutes. So let's change the surface risk time. So if I change that by 15 minutes, watch the data. And I'll run that again. John has now become a Gen 1, and he's only in contact for 7 minutes. So the lowest generation is always reported. If I contact the origin cardholder and become a Gen 1, then we don't clog up the report with other less important generation data. Each exposed cardholder therefore gets one row only, and always at the lowest generation regardless of the exposure duration. So I just set that exposure back to 0 there. I run it again. So we're back to our original data. And now I'm going to show you the export. So earlier on I'd selected email and mobile. So we're going to export the email and the mobile data, or email and mobile PDF data, for both the origin cardholder and the exposed cardholder. So export, you can see I've got one I ran earlier. I'm just going to overcopy that, replace that, come down to here, open an Excel, expand the columns, and show you what we've got here. So we've got the exposed cardholder's name, first name, last name, the division of the exposed cardholder, the email. Here's the email and the mobile for the exposed cardholder, the arrival time, departure time, door, and then we move on to the origin data. So we get the origin cardholder name. We also return the first name and last name. The origin division, email, mobile. There's the email and the mobile for the origin cardholder. The origin arrival time and departure time, also the door that the origin cardholder came through, the initial contact time, the duration in minutes, and here's that generation data that you saw back in the report config window, and the contact zone, the purchase zone. There it is. Now I'm going to close that, and I'm going to show you something else. So I'll close that file. So if I select now to export all cardholders regardless of contact, what I'm also going to do is, for this demo, I'm going to set my generation down to 1. Notice as I moved that from 2 down to 1, it actually updated automatically. So it shows just the generation 1 contacts as my maximum now. So if I export, I think this is going to work. If I export that data, open it again, I now get a whole lot of cardholders that weren't in contact with Harry or any other origin. Over on the right hand side here, you can see in the generation column we put the data not located, and you'll notice also for John Smythe, because I reduced that down to generation 1 max, John now becomes a no contact. He's been seen, but he hasn't returned in the report data. The other cardholders have not been located. So they've not been located, and so we differentiate those two, but yeah, they're the same. It's the same information. It's cardholders that have not been in contact. And I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So back over to you, Zaya. Hope I didn't miss anything.
Cool. Cheers, Wayne. I will now share my screen. Yep. So before we go into any questions that have been raised during this presentation, I would like to go over some of the questions that we've been asked previously, and I thought it would be really good for us to answer these questions here. So the questions that have come up are mainly these three. So the first question is around what happens if I do not have exit readers at some areas of my site. So basically, as Wayne said, it works best if you've got exit readers, but it's based on events, and it will be able to report when an individual has entered the zone, but it will not know when they've exited the zone. To mitigate this, we've got a function or a feature called maximum in-zone time. You can configure this. So basically, once you've configured this, the report will assume that the individual has left a set number of hours after they've entered. So if the value for this maximum in-zone time is 2 hours, the report will assume that a card holder will not stay in the zone for longer than 2 hours. Realistically, this would be set to 8 hours because someone would work for, maybe 8 hours a day, and you would think that after 8 hours, a card holder wouldn't be in the zone. The second question is around what happens if people enter through a door without using their access credential. This application analyzes events generated by Command Center on cardholder movements through doors. If an individual follows another person through a door without using their access credential, they will not be identified in the report. So basically, the report will not know. If you've used your access credentials, obviously Command Center will pick that events, and that event will be picked by the report. Otherwise, if you've tailgated, you will not be identified in the report, even if you were on site. Will the report recognize contact if cardholders entered through different doors configured with different access zones into the same physical area? So, response to that, as the application analyzes historical entry and exit events from an access zone, each access zone is treated as being a physical space. Doors that give access into a single physical space should be configured with the same access zone to ensure the report is as accurate as possible. Cool. So these were some of the questions that had been asked before, and that's why we thought we would address them here. For more information and FAQs, please visit our websites. Yep. Scott, is there any other questions that have been asked that we need to address? Cool. There's only one questions here. Mixed contact generation is not a question statement, if you like. Mixed contact generation is a degrees of separation. Yeah, that's correct. So as Wayne explained, and Scott has responded as well. So the origin card holder being, generation 0, and any subsequent card holder will become generation 2, generation 3, and so on. So that is correct. Apart from that, there's not any other questions. So if that is all, thank you for joining us. Hope you have a great afternoon or morning. And yeah, we will end it there.